Hello and welcome back to the Muscle Engineer podcast. I am, as always, your host Sotak Andrei, and you're listening to episode 31, in which I am joined once again by Adam Tzur for what is going to be the third installment of this ketogenic diet series. So if you haven't listened to the first two episodes, I would recommend you pause this. You go back and listen to those two because they sort of lay the foundation for what we are talking about here. But still, this episode can make sense because we touch on slightly different aspects. So, what are these aspects? Well, we touched on hunger reduction, whether the ketogenic diet is more effective at doing that than a traditional diet. We discussed adherence. And we had a pretty significant chunk of the discussion about something that is a very near and dear topic to me, and that is sort of the psychology of dieting and meaningful goals and all that. So, frankly, if there is one part that you should listen to, is that one. I know most people are interested in the quote X's and O's of fat loss, the macros, the calories and all that, but to be honest, those are very much secondary to the kind of stuff we address there with Adam. The how is secondary to the why. There is that old quote that a man who has a why can bear almost any how, and that is very true. So if that piqued your interest, definitely listen to it. Before we get into the episode, I just want to remind you that if you are interested in getting into shape for summer, now is the time to start training and dieting to get in shape for summer 2020. So if you would like help with your diet and or training, I do online coaching with a limited number of clients. If that interests you, then please reach out, send me an email, send me a message, and we can go from there. So with that out of the way, let's get into episode 31 of the Muscle Engineer podcast with Adam Tzur. Adam, welcome back to the Muscle Engineer podcast.
Thank you, Sotak.
It's third time the charm, as they say, and I cannot wait to continue where we left off. So last time I brought up the question of the ketogenic diet's impact on hunger. And back then you said that you were still collecting data and you wouldn't be able to give a final answer. And since then you have finalized that article. So how does a ketogenic diet impact hunger levels?
Yeah, sure. So it's great to be back. I think our two previous conversations were really awesome. And let's follow up. And I think when it comes to hunger, like we did like another kind of review of the literature, so which searched through like databases, scientific databases like PubMed and stuff like that. We found a lot of interesting studies on ketogenic hunger, like how they measured people, like scientists measure whether people can eat what they eat and how they respond in terms of hunger. So for example, if you're put on a ketogenic diet, how do you feel before and how do you feel after? Like, do you feel more hungry? Do you feel less hungry? And generally, the data in its the general direction is that people become less hungry on keto on average. So there's something about the diet that makes you less hungry. And there are many different reasons. Like, it could be that you eat more protein and you eat foods that are like more whole foods, perhaps. And therefore, that makes you more satiated. So you don't feel as hungry as when you're eating like sugary foods. But it's not like, we don't actually know why people feel less hungry on keto, but on average, we know that people do.
Interesting. I actually was going to follow up with that question. Why is that the case that people seem to be less hungry than on a regular diet? I guess we can... I don't know, have you listened to the Taubes versus Stefan Guyenet debate?
Yeah, I listened to, I think, maybe 60% of it. But you can... Yeah, it was a fun debate.
Not even you had the patience to go through it?
No, I couldn't sit through the entire thing, sadly.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a perfect example. If not even you, who is deeply entrenched into this field, had the patience, then imagine how many people tuned out. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
I mean, like, I really enjoyed the idea.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to connect this back to that it could just be that it's what Stefan talks about, that when you eliminate these processed foods, that you simply reduce the food reward of the diet, basically reduce the palatability of the foods, and foods just become not as attractive, I guess. So people just don't want to eat as much. And obviously there is a factor of eating high protein. And once again, I think we touched on this before, but I think we both agree that the main benefit of a ketogenic diet is the high protein component, not necessarily the high fat component, although probably that plays a role too. But I think that's more just of a factor of getting in calories, because if you can't have carbs, then you have to have an energy source somewhere, and you go to fats or resort to fats for that. Would you agree?
I think, yeah, you said like the high protein of the diet is really important. I don't see how fat in itself as a macronutrient I don't think I would describe it as important just to get a lot of it. I don't think that's like a goal. So, but we also have to look beyond just like, the macronutrients like protein and fat. We have to look at kind of like you talked about, like, which types of foods are eating? Are they processed and are not processed? And I would say there's a good chance that because the foods are much more, on a ketogenic diet, you eat like a lot more meat and vegetables, so whole foods. And that could be like a big reason for why people feel less hungry on the diet.
And is there a consensus or some indication of what the ketogenic state or ketones, elevated ketone levels play in this? Because Joe Rogan, he likes to mention a lot that, for example, even during intermittent fasting, the reason why you don't feel hungry during the fast, for example, when you're fasting, is because you get into ketosis and then ketone levels rise and stuff. Is that accurate? Is that a big part or a significant part, or we just simply don't know yet?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. In terms of fasting, I don't know if you would get into ketosis just by doing like a regular intermittent fast, like, skipping breakfast, for example, right? That's like the simplest intermittent fast. I don't think that necessarily that will get you into ketosis. I mean, maybe like a very mild ketosis, but not deep ketosis in any state. Like, you typically need like 2 or 3 days of severe carb restriction before you can do that. And sometimes even like 4 or 5 days. So probably not an intermittent fasting. And there's also a good question, you asked, like, is the ketones, themselves, do they lead to reduction in hunger? And from what we looked at in the data, then there isn't really a lot of human evidence here. All right. So it's a possibility, like, we can hypothesize that, like, that high ketones that make you less hungry, but we don't have strong evidence. We have one study that, like, with kind of ketone supplements, people are given ketones and then they feel less hungry afterwards. But this could also be because the supplement consists of other things as well, right? So it's not just it could be other things that are, for example, people typically report they feel like nauseous and stuff, or kind of bad. They feel bad after taking ketones, which could be that this could also lower hunger because you become nauseous, not because the ketones themselves, are the cause of their hunger reduction.
Very interesting. And let's not forget that those exogenous keto supplements also have calories, right?
Mm-hmm. They do. So we have to be, depending on, like, people can mix all kinds of things there, but ketones themselves, I don't remember the exact caloric content, but ketones themselves, they're energy, so they have calories. Calories are measurement of unit of energy, right? So the quick answer is that there isn't enough evidence to say that ketones themselves can reduce hunger. We just need more studies, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just reminds me, when people dump butter into their coffee and they're like, oh my goodness, this cuts off my hunger so nicely. And I'm like, of course it does. You just dump 600 calories into your coffee. It would be a shame if it didn't.
Yeah. I mean, eating, will reduce hunger in the moment, right? So the question is like, do you feel hungry on average throughout the weekend? That's an important question, because if you ask someone after a meal, are you hungry? And it's like, no, then wow, that doesn't tell us anything. We have to know, like, during the week or during a week, is your hunger like 10 out of 10? Like, are you constantly craving food, or is it like 5 out of 10? So if I wanted to like speculate, I would say that maybe the ketogenic diet, when you what you eat affects your gut microbiome, the bacteria that live in your intestines and such. So maybe the ketogenic diet could affect the microbiome in a positive way, which would make you feel less hungry, because the gut communicates to your brain a lot of different things. And that's a whole other discussion, but it's a hypothesis at least.
Yeah, that area is very interesting, and people seem to report a very clear mental state, focus and stuff on keto, and then also the carnivore. Like Ben Pokruski just posted a couple of days ago something that he tried, the carnivore diet for 30 days, something like that. But I don't want to digress into that. It's just something that's interesting to mention. So far we have mostly talked about theoretical aspects, that in theory, ketogenic diet can do this, ketogenic diet can do that, it can do this, it can optimize your body composition, it can help you lose fat, it can stave off hunger. But the big question is it actually doable? Do people really stick to it? Because, it's one thing to work in theory. If you can do this, then it's going to work. But the other aspect is it practical for most people? Are people actually going to do it? So how hard is it to stick to a ketogenic diet? Do people adhere to it long term? And I know that in your article, you differentiate between free living conditions and research conditions, because obviously those are two very different things. So you can also touch on that if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of research on keto and on adherence. The thing is that, like you said, we can explain like what is the free living condition and what is like a research condition. So when researchers when they want to do research on you, they can either just give you instructions like, please eat this diet, you can eat the ketogenic diet, and we expect that you eat these types of food and that you exclude carbohydrate foods. So that's like, people do that they live their life as usual, and then they do the ketogenic diet. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to basically lock people inside a hospital, and then you tell people, then you can kind of feed them or control exactly what they eat, and then you can see if they stick to it, or you can also force them to stick to it. So what we are interested in is kind of the free living condition. So when you tell people to eat keto, but you can't force them, because we're looking to see if they can you stick to the diet, right? And if you can stick to the diet without somebody looking over your shoulder all the time, then I would say that's a good diet. But if you can only stick to the diet if people are constantly monitoring you and telling you what to eat, then that's not really impressive, actually, because it doesn't reflect what happens in the real world. So basically the short answer is, people, as with all diets, people struggle sticking to the ketogenic diet over the long term. So when we're talking like more than 6 months, people struggle to stick to the diet. So how do you know if people stick to the diet? Well, the first thing is you can look at, you can ask people to report how many carbs they eat every day. That's one way. So self-reported carb intake. That's actually not very good, because people tend to misreport. So for example, I might say, oh, today I ate 50 grams of carbs. But if we actually control that, then I ate actually 70 or 80 grams. So some of it can be like just an accident, people don't know. or poor reporting, or it could also be like that you kind of want to present your best side, so you're basically lying, like a white lie, that like you want to believe the best thing about yourself, so you don't, yeah. So that's a challenge. So we have to kind of compare these carb intakes. We can ask people to monitor their blood ketones with like a capillary measurement tool. Basically, you prick your finger, you get some blood, and it tells you what your ketone level is. So you ask people to kind of report that as well, or they go to the hospital and they're measured there, how many ketones they have. So that way you can kind of double check that people, that they are actually truthful about their carb intake. So what we generally see, as we found when we kind of systematically, we looked for through the PubMed and search databases, and we found that so many studies, and in most of the studies in the long term, over 6 months, then people, they eat more and more carbohydrates. Like let's say they're supposed to eat 50 grams of carbs. So what happens is they actually, after a month or after 3 months, it's like, okay, 60 grams of carbs. After a year, maybe it's like 120 grams of carbs. So the problem is that you recede, you're supposed to eat a certain amount of carbs, but you slowly eat more and more carbs. And then you're no longer in ketosis. So that's an issue because, adherence to the ketogenic diet on average is poor in the long term. So that means that not for every individual, that's not true, that's the thing with averages, we can only say what works on average. And if you look at individuals, some people, they respond very well and they can stick to the diet and they have amazing ketone levels and all that stuff for the long term. So I can't really say, if people are considering starting the ketogenic diet, I can't say that you shouldn't try because you can stick to it. That would be absurd. I can just say that, as with all diets, not just the ketogenic diet, all diets, people struggle adhering to them over time. And we see something called the obesity recidivism rate. What that means is that when people who are obese go on a diet, they can lose like a lot of weight after like a year of like an intense weight loss diet. But what you see is if you follow them up 5-10 years later, like between 60 and 90% of obese people, they regain their lost weight. So it's kind of what's the point of losing the weight if you're going to regain it 5 years later? I'm not trying to blame the participants. I'm just saying that when you lose weight, the body has all kinds of mechanisms to make you regain the weight. So for example, you might start to move less, to expend less energy. You might become hungrier, and eventually you just have to eat more. So that's the body's way to kind of regain. The body wants to regain the weight, sadly.
Yeah, it definitely does. And this was one aspect that Stefan and Gary talked about. So is it harder to adhere? Because you mentioned that adherence rates in general are pretty poor in the long term. And I don't know, I'm thinking about this because obviously it's part of my job basically to ensure that people actually follow or at least try to implement some sort of behavior change and lifestyle change that sticks with them for years and hopefully decades to come. And I was wondering, like, is this simply a mental approach issue? Could it be that simply just the idea of being on a diet is what is tiring or gets fatiguing, after a while? Or is it something specific? Because simply the idea of being on a diet can suggest or even unconsciously plant a seed that is something that you will do short term. Whereas if you, let's say you identify, and there's some sort of philosophy, I think, in this, or a line of cognitive behavior or something like that. Basically, you have to identify as a type of person who does that behavior. So you don't say, I don't eat bread because I'm trying to lose weight. You say things like, I am the type of person who does not eat bread. And it is what it is. And, I do that, me personally, I do the same with alcohol, like, or with smoking. It doesn't even cross my mind because I don't smoke. and it's not really a question. Meanwhile, if I see a cake, then I don't really identify as the type of person who doesn't eat cake. I'm the type of person who might or might not eat cake,
Yeah.
So then that question, it actually is something I have to consciously think about, and that could be one aspect. What I think about this, and is it harder to adhere to ketogenic diet? Is it any harder? Is it harder than any other quote-unquote named diet? Is the issue simply trying to name your diet in the first place?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, we haven't found any evidence that the diet is harder or easier to stick to. And it's like you say, when you create like identity about your diet, you create like a narrative for yourself. That you're the type of person that can't do this or this, and maybe the term diet itself make you think that it's something temporary. So for many people, it's going to be necessarily, if you're obese, to make like a lifestyle change that's going to last for, well, pretty much your entire life. And that's going to be like a tough thought. Like, you're used to eating a certain amount of food, and now you have to eat less. That's really difficult, and that's the recidivism rate in obesity and the problems with adherence is true for all diets. So it's not just unique to keto. It's interesting that you mentioned the long-term and short-term, because we talked about that earlier. And, for the short term, I think at least, for bodybuilders, for powerlifters, athletes, they won't have this issue because they're typically like, they can control their weight, they're pretty lean, and they can easily jump on a diet and or use it like transitionary, like do keto for like a 6 months and transition to something else or something like that. But for people who are obese, the advice needs to be different because, it needs to be something if you don't make permanent changes to your life, then you're gonna regain the weight. So maybe keto, I don't know, or maybe like any extreme diet is not sustainable for a long time. Maybe it is. Or maybe it can be used as like a transition. For example, with Atkins, you start with going kind of hard in ketosis, and then after a while you ease back and you eat more, you reintroduce carbohydrates over time.
Yeah, actually, I talked about this with Lyle McDonald. I personally haven't read the original Atkins diet, but Lyle mentioned that it actually was pretty solid, the original one. Basically, as far as I remember, the idea was that, overweight people have some sort of carbohydrate intolerance, which is probably true, in that their body doesn't really handle carbs properly. So it's best to just reduce them for a while or move away from them and kind of resensitize, although I don't like that term, but anyway, I'll just use it. So kind of resensitize your body to carbohydrates and regain insulin sensitivity and that kind of stuff, and then increase that carbohydrate level. So I guess I might as well just bring this up because it seems like a good transitional point. We talked with Lyle about this, but I would like to hear your opinion as well. So I assume that you have read Christopher Gardner's Diet Fits trial.
Yep.
Basically, and again, this was brought up in the Gary Taubes versus Stefan Guillen debate. Gary dismissed it because it wasn't true. He missed the point, basically. He missed the forest for the trees, but that's not surprising of him. So his whole point was that it wasn't a good study because it wasn't truly low carb. So they were comparing a moderate carb, low fat diet to a moderate carb, high fat diet. And that is, I guess, partially true, but what's partially true as well, or what's really important from that study, is that they started from a very low carb or a very low fat diet and basically instructed people to increase their carbohydrates or fat intakes by a couple of, I don't know how many grams it was off the top of my head, but basically their point was to increase your carbs and your fats to a level that you think you can sustain. And that's the biggest lesson from there, I think, is that most likely following an either extreme low fat or either extreme low carb diet isn't sustainable for most people. Now, I know there are some who can sustain it, but most probably cannot. So what do you think? I guess just takeaways from that study or lessons we can conclude from that, or maybe some suggestions or ideas for people for long-term strategies on how to increase adherence rates, or let's say someone had a weight loss success on a ketogenic diet, and they have lost a very significant amount of weight, and they are happy with where they are, but they would like to stay there, and they would like to not regain that weight. So what would be the proper, or at least a valuable or valid way of transitioning away from a ketogenic diet to a more balanced diet that can be sustained long term?
Yeah, that's that's the $1 million question, right? Like, then you can solve obesity. So I can just say, like, I'll move just beyond the Gardner study, and I can give you like a summary. This actually kind of, I'm planning to write an article on this, but like, what's the factors that make people stick to a diet, and how can they sustain it, and how can they be successful? So I think I can identify a couple of factors. So the first factor is to have like follow-up, accountability. Some of the Virta studies, they have like a very intense follow-up with their participants. They have like a research team. They guide you from the start. They call you every week or every month, and you're kind of like, you're always accountable to something, and they're watching over you. They're helping you. Some studies, they even have like weekly sessions with psychologists and a therapist and nutrition or dietitian, sorry, not nutritionologist. The more intense the intervention is, the more things that are happening, the better it is. So, for example, some studies also use like a community-based intervention. So they do all these things with a follow-up, and they have like an entire community of people join. So everyone is doing it together. You can also see this on Facebook. Like, for example, when there are some, for example, Keto Gains, I believe. They do like, sometimes they have like group sessions, so I think, where like they have like a challenge or something. Or Marty McKendall, who has like a challenge, right?
Exactly.
And then you have like a week or a month or something where you're supposed to reach a certain goal, and then it becomes like a community thing. It becomes it becomes really cool, and people become motivated when if you're alone with your diet, nobody to talk to about it, nobody who can relate, you don't have any follow-up or accountability. I mean, why should you stick to that? It's the more intense the intervention, and by intervention I mean everything around the diet, the more intense the intervention is, generally the better. Now the problem is, of course, you can't follow people up for like 5, 6, 7 years. That would be, to have an intense intervention for this long, that would be too hard, right? So I don't know like what's the solution here. There is some people also suggest like personalized nutrition, for example, that the diet has to be really personalized and individualized to your unique needs. So we can't just say, oh, eat less than 50 grams of carbs, that's the end, that's the diet. That's not personalized at all. It needs to be like, you start here, and then we see, how does that feel? Which foods do you like? How can you sustain this for a month, for 6 months, for a year? Okay, when you can't sustain it anymore, which changes can we do that allow you to not regain weight? Like, do we need to switch food choices? Do we need to reintroduce a certain amount of carbs? There are endless questions, like you do coaching and stuff, so like there are so many ways to personalize a diet, and the studies, at least that I've read, that have good success with like adherence, they're intense, and they also have like personalized nutrition and all this stuff.
So you brought up two very good points. The first is the value of a community, and I cannot agree more. I mean, that's the power of social media, right? So you can, if you want to, and that's the downside of social media as well, that if you want to, you can find like-minded people, and you can get into your own what's the term, bubble, and that's a good and a bad thing, obviously. So if you want to, you can find supportive or like-minded people who can support you into your weight loss journey, but also you can alienate yourself from perhaps other approaches that might work better, or more you become close-minded, and obviously that's just up to the individual. And I don't think personally that that's a fault of the media. I mean, everyone is free to use the internet however they want to, but if we get off social media, then hey, we might as well just find that in the gym, for example. You could find, there are gyms that do these weight loss challenges. There are gyms where obviously you can work with a coach or a trainer, but also simply you can go with some friends and keep yourself accountable. Also, you could do the same thing with your partner, and obviously, the more you can do this, or the more levels you have, it's probably you better off you are. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it. I just shared a clip from one of Jordan Peterson's recent interviews with someone, and basically this other person was saying that his mother never gave up on him, basically, and she always believed in him even more so than he did in himself. And that's so powerful. And Jordan mentioned that if you have two parents who believe in you and who encourage you, even when perhaps you yourself are trying to or are tempted to doubt yourself, then that's unbelievably powerful. And if you have both parents, then that's fantastic. If you have one, that's awesome. So I think that extends to this weight loss aspect too. If you have a partner who supports you, if you have friends who are like-minded, if you have a good gym community, and you are part of a Facebook group, then I think then you are immensely much more likely to reach and sustain your goals than someone who, like you said, is isolated, doesn't have anyone. And I think in that situation, the food becomes just much more tempting, I mean, food tastes great and it gives you a short-term dopamine hit and sense of pleasure and stuff, and satisfaction. And if you don't have anything more meaningful to counter off that urge, then I think you are fighting uphill battle.
So yeah, like you mentioned, like there's a lot of cool, a lot of important aspects here. Like I think sometimes when we discuss diets, we talk about we talk about the macros, we talk about what you can eat, and we talk about all these details that don't really matter. Like if the goal is to lose weight and sustain that, the biggest, actually, I would say, I also read a lot of psychology research. The biggest aspect is psychology and everything that relates to that. So I mean, anything from like loneliness, like mental health issues, they affect which types of foods you eat, and the environment you live in. Like the environment we live in, like an environment where there are few food queues everywhere. You have the ability to eat cheap foods and hyper palatable, high calorie foods everywhere. That's another challenge. As you need like the internal fortitude to withstand those challenges. And there are so many aspects here that just go beyond the ketogenic diet or the low-fat diet.
I 100% agree that psychology is huge. I mean, I think every coach who does this for a number of years, the more experience you have, the more you tend to come to this conclusion that it doesn't matter how well put your training plan is or how well put together your nutrition plan is. If you don't have a meaningful goal that's actually going to sustain you when the tough times come, which they will, then you will quit. So that's a life lesson right there. And the second point you brought up is the value of personalized nutrition. Now, I don't know how much is actually the personalized nutrition and how much is the appearance of it. So what I mean by this is it actually that you are following a particular macronutrient breakdown and the carb amount and fat amount that works with your body, or simply you have this notion that, hey, this diet has been personalized for me and it's going to work exceptionally well because it has been personalized for me, myself only. And I think that's the value in all of these genetic tests that are coming out, and they are saying that, oh, with your genetics, and I don't know if I posted at one point a meme from Martin McDonald. It said that for your body type, you have to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight, and that's basically what these genetic testing companies do. Like, oh, so your genetics show that this and this, and basically your genetic breakdown suggests that you have to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. Good, awesome.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's kind of a funny and but flippant way to say it. So, in terms of personalized nutrition and like gene testing, I would definitely agree that today we're not at the stage where you can find your genotype and kind of determine what you need to eat to have like the perfect adherence. And so we're not at that stage yet. But today I read an interesting paper on caffeine, the supplement caffeine, and how it affects your performance, endurance or anaerobic performance. So they did like a genotype test, and they found that certain genotypes, people with certain genotypes, they were less likely to have a performance effect, and some people actually have they performed worse with caffeine when they were given caffeine. But most people, like 70% or something, had the genotype that allowed them to have a performance increase. So that's kind of interesting, because then you can start to look at that, but not just in the performance context, but in terms of like foods, genotypes, and how different foods could affect your adherence in the long term. And maybe in the future, in like, I don't know, 10 years or something, we can be able to customize a meal plan that's like perfect for you, and that will make you just feel amazing. And so this is, at this point, it's speculation. I don't know if it will happen, but I think it's very likely that it will, because there's so much interesting genetics research now.
I think it's what we talk about here is more relevant for high-level athletes who, where adherence isn't really a factor. I mean, it's your job, you have to do it, and it is what it is. And that's where these things really shine. But I think for just a regular person who tries to lose weight, I don't think that these genetic discoveries will supersede having a meaningful goal and something to drive you and something to run away from. I think you need both of those. So, talk to anyone who has lost a meaningful amount of weight or who has changed their lifestyle in a meaningful way, and I think they will tell you. I mean, I was just discussing with someone this, and like I said that, in 2010, my first girlfriend dumped me. And I still remember that I had this question in my mind. Was it because I was fat? And that was a point where I decided that there won't be ever at a point where another girl will dump me because I'm fat, or there will never be a doubt in my mind that was the reason why she broke up with me, And hey, it might sound silly, but it's not actually. That's a serious question. People wonder about that all the time. Like, let's say someone cheats on your partner, and I know we are digressing a bit, but I think it's still relevant. And like, your partner cheats on you, and hey, you wonder, was it because I'm not physically attractive? And I think that's a serious motivation for people. So that's just one example of my own. But I think when you find that sort of meaning in your life, when you, let's say, you want to be able to play with your child or with your grandchildren, those are the stuff that really make you not pick up that bag of cookies you want and choose something healthier instead.
And that's what you're pointing at, a very powerful term here, and that's internal motivation or internal drive. So we generally divide between like external and internal motivation. And when you're talking about like internal motivation, it's something like it's a bigger goal. It's something that drives you no matter what. And it's the same thing with like training and exercise. Like if you have external motivation, like, I don't know, maybe you have a friend who you like to go to the gym with, and you do that. If that's like, you could say that's an external motivation. If your friend moves or you can't stop going to the gym, then you stop if you're dependent on that friend. If that's your only motivation, that it's fun to go to the gym with your friend, then you're entirely dependent on that external thing being there. And as we all know, with life, things aren't like permanently there for us, and things will change, and situations will change, you will move, and the external circumstances change. So that's why people struggle with sticking to the diet. Like, for example, if you want like a summer body 2020, the summer body 2020, so you go on a diet right now, I wouldn't say that's a strong internal motivation. Like, when we're talking about a strong internal motivation, that's something more like, you had a stroke and the doctors told you that you need, like, if you want to live, you need to change your diet. then you have like this strong internal drive to fix things. And or like you said, like with a girlfriend, or anything that's traumatic, or something that's like a big thing in your life that you need to change or want to change, then that becomes a strong internal motivation. And that, I think that's a big key here.
Some people are more reactive to that than others. Some are more internally driven, some are more externally driven. But it's a good idea to not let anything outside control you, or not be reliant on anything external. Like just the other day, I forgot my headphones home, and I was like, should I just, skip my Romanian deadlifts and put them tomorrow, because tomorrow I will have my headphones with me? And I was like, no, I'm not doing that, because then I've created a precedent. And no, I still did my usual workout, and it was good. So music, weightlifting shoes, lifting belt, whatever it is, try not to rely on anything external, because like you said, and then there's the micro one. On the macro scale, I could constantly hear from people that, why did you stop coming to the gym? Well, my brother didn't come with me, my sister didn't come with me no longer, or that friend I used to come with, and I just don't like coming alone. And I'm like, come on, I mean, look around, there are plenty of people here, you're not coming alone. Yeah, but it's not the same, and that's just a perfect example of what you were talking about there.
Yeah, that reminds me of an episode of Bro Science. Have you seen the one where it's like he needs to squat, but the moon and the sun needs to be in perfect alignment, and the rotation on the axis, and he needs to he can't have any pains anywhere, and everything needs to be perfect for him to squat. That kind of reminds me of that. And that's true, like if you find like the easiest thing in the world is to find excuses for things. That's like the easiest thing in the world. So that's why. So like with diet, for example, after you've done it for a year and you're like, okay, I've done it for a year, I'm good now, I want to go back to my old diet. You can come up with excuses like, oh, it's difficult, or it makes my life more complicated and it's boring. And so instead of trying to fix that, you kind of just go back to your old diet because you feel like you need a reward or something. So yeah, then you lose your progress. And that's kind of the same thing with training and everything. Like once you start, like you say, once you set a precedence, that's something you can kind of chill. Or for example, when I used to jog before, like many years ago. And then let's say I wanted to jog like 40 minutes on the treadmill. And then I was like, oh, you know what, today I feel like 39 minutes and 30 seconds is enough. And later it's like, okay, 30 minutes is enough, or then 20 minutes. And eventually you go into a spiral where you just give yourself excuses and you don't follow up what you're supposed to do. So you need to be very kind of, strict with yourself. And that's not really appealing for many people. I can understand that.
There are much more deeper reasons why that is the case, but it is. And the good thing is, hey, if you can create a bad behavior, then you can also create a positive behavior. You can choose to not quit your workout or not skip that gym session when you don't feel 100%, or this or that, you forgot your headphones at home or whatever. I mean, you can always find an excuse to not do something, or you can always find a reason to do something, and the choice is right there in front of us all the time.
Yeah, same thing with diet. I mean, it doesn't, like, let's say you have one day a week where you allow yourself to eat kind of candy or whatever. Let's say you have that as a rule. So let's say you're like, oh, well, what if I start doing that 2 times a week? Like, why not? Or maybe, oh, today it won't hurt to eat that extra unhealthy thing, that donut or whatever. And, that's how you regress. Like, slowly but surely, you start eating more. And, like, personally, I can't really relate because I've never had that drive, but I know that many people, that's like an issue, that you kind of just want more. Yeah. So I mean, people are different. I guess I'm lucky in that sense.
Just yesterday, I was tired. At like 1:30 I was going home, and I went into a shop and I got like 5 chocolate croissants and I ate them, and today I felt bloated like hell and shitty. So there's your lesson. I could have just suck it up, went home, tired, hungry, but today I would have woken up leaner, and I would have felt much better. So there's my lesson. But hey, the good thing is we can always learn, and you can always choose to not do the same thing next time.
I think what's the difference here? It's the difference between like acute hedonism, like enjoying something in the moment, which is also very difficult to resist, and then there's like the long-term happiness. So things that typically cause long-term happiness and satisfaction, they will reduce short-term hedonism, and things that increase short-term hedonism, like entertainment and eating candy and foods, they will decrease long-term happiness if done extensively.
Basically, the way Jordan Peterson says it, search what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
Yeah, yeah, that's much quicker.
12 Rules for Life. Go read that book. Okay, so let's go back to the ketogenic diet and let's touch on some more tangible aspects of it. So we already covered energy balance, we covered macronutrients, we covered the high protein aspect of it. We mentioned that it's most likely just a form of creating calorie deficit, and there isn't really magical necessarily about being in a ketogenic state. Are there any aspects that are perhaps unique to a ketogenic diet if you're just considering whatever, losing fat, gaining muscle, that kind of stuff, optimizing your body composition? Is there a particular reason why you should choose a ketogenic diet over another diet that's calorie and protein equated?
I think one aspect that is very unique is you eat less calories, you eat less food without trying to. So in the literature, we call it ad libitum, a spontaneous decrease in ad libitum energy intake. So that what that means is that you eat less without trying to when you eat keto. Because it's satiating, you become less hungry. You also, in studies, I think people eat like 400 or 500 calories less a day without really trying to. And that's actually really impressive. And that's kind of perhaps one of the biggest strengths of the diet is that, that. And also when you eat keto, you naturally eat more protein. So you don't have to, you mentioned protein equated, meaning that, you can set a certain level of protein intake, and you have to like count protein and see if it matches your intake level. But with keto, the good thing is that you don't have to really count anything. Like you just have to eat less. You have to eat a low, like less than 60 or 70 or 80 grams of carbs, depending on the individual. And then you'll be in ketosis, and you will naturally eat more protein. So that's very good. And there are many other positive aspects, like so you naturally eat less food, and then you naturally lose weight without really. You don't have to count. Like you don't have to count calories and weigh food, because it's very hard to overeat just protein and fat. It's very hard to overeat in that. And even studies where they try to overfeed people on keto, they kind of fail, because they tell people, okay, you need to eat like 500 calories more per day, and then people still lose weight and fat. So they struggle overeating on the diet. That would be like the strongest aspects, I think.
Very cool, very cool. And I think that's powerful, Hey, if someone just wants simple rules, they don't like to think about things, they don't like to weigh and measure stuff.
Yeah, and I actually, I forgot to mention a couple of other benefits as well. It would be, for example, studies on diabetics, on type 2 diabetics who are on ketogenic diet. They see a rapid reduction in blood glucose and improvements in, diabetes biomarkers like HbA1c. And basically you can fix your diabetes. Maybe I shouldn't say cure, but like when you're on keto, your diabetes goes back to like a normal level, or your blood glucose becomes normal, and it would seem like on your blood test that you're not diabetic anymore. Now, of course, it's not a cure in the sense that it's permanent, because if you start eating a regular diet again, your insulin and blood glucose will become problematic again, right? So that's it has, and of course other benefits are like neurological for treating Alzheimer's, traumatic brain damage, and there are many epilepsy. I don't want to list like all the different conditions you can treat, but ketogenic diet has many like specific purposes, and I won't go into cancer. That's a whole other discussion.
It's very interesting. So I think the most practical or the most applicable one is simply simplicity of it and straightforward rules that don't really have to think about. So if someone wants a diet that's relatively easy to understand and has some guidelines that are easy to follow, and they don't want to think about counting calories and stuff, then it's perhaps a good option. And as far as the medical intervention, that's very cool, but obviously that's not something we cover here, and people should just discuss that with their dietitian and their medical professional. But nonetheless, it's a very interesting point to bring up for sure. So the last question I want to ask is the other side of this coin. So we mentioned perhaps the unique benefits. What are some unique side effects that could appear or that we must consider before hopping on a ketogenic diet or recommending it to someone?
That's very interesting. There are so many different side effects here that we can discuss. The one thing I would just want to add to the last answer is that, if you're on metformin or diabetes medication, and if you go on a ketogenic diet without being monitored by your doctor, you can get dangerously low blood glucose. So please, if you're on any kind of medication, check with your doctor first, because it can be actually dangerous to combine blood glucose lowering medication and the ketogenic diet. With that said, side effects. So right now we're doing like a literature search of the ketogenic diet for side effects. We've identified like a ton of studies. I think we have like anywhere between 15 and 25 studies we can use. We look at the studies, like what kind of side effects are reported. On the ketogenic diet, we see side effects. You typically call it, under the umbrella term, you just call it the keto flu, right? Like in the beginning of the diet, you will feel headache, nausea, constipation, fatigue, muscle weakness, dry mouth, bad breath, hair loss. So what I thought was that these effects are just really transient, and then they go away after a couple of weeks. That's what people write online, at least. But once I read into the research, I saw that many studies, some of these side effects can persist for like a year. And people, like hair loss, for example, it's not just something that happens a couple of weeks and then it goes away. It's some studies report people losing hair like a year on keto. That's actually a big issue, and many of the studies also find that the side effects are stronger on keto compared to like alternative control diets, like a low-fat, high-carb diet. So that's something that needs to be considered. There are some severe side effects here, and they can actually demotivate you strongly. So what do you do? Like, I guess that would be like an important thing. Like, how can you kind of prevent these side effects? It would be, per the literature, there haven't been a ton of studies on how to prevent it, but there are many many researchers, they recommend using electrolyte supplements like magnesium, salt, potassium, because the ketogenic diet is dehydrating. It means that you lose glycogen, you lose minerals, and you lose a lot of water. And these things together, especially in the first 2 months of the diet, can lead to severe side effects. That are very, subjective side effects that are very uncomfortable. So you can partially fix them by, drinking more water and mineral, electrolytes, multi-mineral supplements, and doing strength training as well to maintain your glycogen and water.
Not really upsetting, but it's certainly something that just cannot be brushed to the side. It's something serious we're talking about here. I wonder how much of that is simply a badly put together diet and creating some sort of nutritional deficiencies. I assume that plays a big part of it in it. I mean, people seem, I don't know, I mean, I work in a gym and I vacuum the lockers, and man, in the women's locker room, like in a day, the amount of hair you see on the floor is just astonishing. Like, I wonder, like, are these women just simply just losing hair like mad? Like, what is going on here?
Are they all on keto? Just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like, what the hell is going on? Is every one of you following keto diet and you're just becoming bored like Saitama or That's a One Punch Man reference.
Well, I'm already bald, so I don't have that problem.
Yeah, I'm actually annoyed by having to cut my hair. Like, I was thinking about this the other day. Hey, perhaps I'll just become Jason Statham for the summer and fuck it, and be done for a couple of months. So I guess just to leave with some sort of practical recommendation is, if you want to follow ketogenic diet, make sure you plug in your commonly used foods into something like Chronometer or some sort of database that will calculate your nutrients for you. Marty Kendall has the nutrient optimizer where you can do the same. Basically make sure to not be deficient in anything, because I mean, if you are deficient for a day or two, who cares? But over a year, yeah, that stuff could manifest into something like losing hair or nails becoming weak or starting to lose bone mass or who knows what else. So that's not something to take lightly. So as always, just be responsible, take this seriously. I mean, it's your life, it's your body, and you only have one. So you only live once, quite literally. So might as well be careful. Yeah, exactly. Might as well be careful about what you do.
Yeah, it needs to be, like, any diet is a risk, you can say. Like, if the diet is poorly put together, like you talked about, that's going to be a problem. So you need to think about, like, what you're eating, what you're getting less of. And also on the ketogenic diet, what we see is people typically eat much less fiber. So they can drop their fiber intake by like 70% if they're on keto, which could also cause these side effects. So the more you think through the diet and plan and have all these macronutrients and micronutrients in order, then yeah, that will help fix your issues. But if you kind of just do it YOLO style, then that might be problematic. Yeah.
I think we covered all the main topics I wanted to go through. And in these 3 episodes, I think we have 3 hours of content about the ketogenic diet. So I think if people want to have a very good idea of what's going on, then this will serve as a nice overview teaser. They can read your articles, and then if they want to embark on it, then they can get into contact with the dietitian or the medical professional and go from there. So Adam, I will make sure to link the relevant articles in the description as always. If there's anything you want to leave the listeners with, any projects you want to direct their attention towards, anything you want to plug, now is your time.
I think everyone should come to scifit.net. And we keep working on the ketogenic diets. We have some really interesting articles coming up. Like, it's going to be the ketogenic diet side effects. And after that, we're going to do, I think, well, this is actually the first time I say it, but we're going to figure out if the ketogenic diet is anabolic or catabolic. There's a lot of interesting research on that. Some say it's protein sparing, and yeah, we're going to look into that. And after that, we're going to put together some kind of like an ultimate summary article of the ketogenic diet, where we basically make like a huge summary of all the different aspects of the ketogenic diet. Everything from strength training to side effects to adherence, keto flush. Like, we're going to put together, it's going to be such a huge, amazing article that I think everyone's going to love it. And it's going to be free, of course, as it always is. Except for that, I want to just thank you again, Shotek, for these interviews and these talks. I think they're really interesting. And I also want to thank the guys over at Keto Gains and Marty Kendall of Nutrient Optimizer, Greg Knuckles of Strength Theory. Well, I can't really shout out everyone. It would be like Brandon Roberts, Grant Tinsley, Vincent Sprania. Like, there are so many people that I just that's the ones I can mention right now, at least.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this, and it sounds like we might have to do part 4 in the future.
That would be awesome. Maybe after like the big summary article, then we can put everything into context.
Yep, looking forward to that. Okay, so that was episode 31 of the Muscle Engineer podcast with Adam Tzur. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you find it valuable and you were able to extract some sort of wisdom out of it. Now, as usual, I will end the episode with my top takeaways. The first is just a recap or a summary of a ketogenic diet and its main role. So when it comes to fat loss and body composition optimization, it really is nothing more than just a way to control your calories for the most part. It might have some sort of unique effects, but I think simply the easy rules or guidelines it has, the constraints it puts on people, the high protein focus, which should be the focus, not the high fat component. Those are the things that make a ketogenic diet a suitable option for fat loss, not the ketones, not the high fat, not the butter, nothing like that. So if you would like to do this due to those reasons, then go for it. If you think it has some sort of magical property, it does not. I'm sorry. Second point is what I mentioned in the intro as well, and that is the value of having, first of all, a meaningful goal. It has to be much more than, oh, I just want to get chicks or whatever. Now, I get it, that can work in the short term. However, when the shit hits the fan, so to speak, and things get hard, that will not sustain you. You need something more meaningful, something to justify the quote suffering. And I know for myself, I just was not really in the right mental state, I guess, in the past couple of months, which is why I did not really keep up my own personal fat loss journey, but I am. This is my first official week of actually committed fat loss dieting. So, like I mentioned in the episode as well, ask anyone who has lost a meaningful amount of weight and who has kept it off. They will give you very well-defined and very in-depth reasons why they are doing it. And then the second stage is, once you have set that meaningful goal, it does not hurt to have a support community around you. Now, like I said, this can be in person, in the form of workout partners, a significant other, friends, that sort of stuff. It can be online via a Facebook community or something like that. It's great to have someone to talk to, someone to share with your feelings, see, perhaps finding someone who you can relate to or they can relate to you, see that you're not alone, so to speak. And that goes a long way in helping your success. So there you have it. That was episode 31. Next week, or at the end of this week, if I manage, I will release part 2 of the conversation I had with Lai McDonald. And then the episode after that is going to be a new guest who you will all be familiar with. You'll see when it comes out and you will be very happy with it. Until then, have an awesome week, crush your goals, and go lift something heavy.